Most of them are based on my research. And what I'm going to do is talk about media representation and young people from the global south and what we can do to support them to tell their own stories. So, first of all, I just want to reinforce that media representation is very important in the mediated world today. Media images, media narratives, media reinforced stereotypes, right? All of this have material impact on people's lives, their lived realities. So when the late prominent Nigerian novelist and essayist Chinua Achebe he said this in a 1994 interview with Paris Review, and he said that that until the lions have their own historians, the story of the history of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. So it's very important that who gets to tell the story, right? Because the story will be told from that person's perspective. Similarly, another Nigerian author, Chimamanda Adichie, has talked frequently about the danger of a single story, right? Because she says that, the single story is not always wrong or incorrect, but it does create stereotypes. And rather than saying that a single story is untrue, we should say that a single story is incomplete. A story is complete only when it is told by many different voices who have experienced something from very different perspectives. And at the same time, we also must remember that diversity is inadequate without authenticity. And if we don't create the right kind of spaces for people to tell their stories, there is not going to be proper self-representation. So in my talk today, I'm going to talk about how young people from countries of the global south, in countries like India, are striving to get their due representation in the global media venues, especially in the global digital spaces, and how these young people use digital storytelling and culture brokering to find a global audience for their voices. The talk also deliberates on what we can do to strengthen the voices of these young people, to strengthen their capacity to use their public voice. We all know that countries of the global south, including India, have seen unprecedented rise in the digital media use, with the growing ease in getting, at least some data, depending, of course, on your financial situation and your geographical location. But it's definitely getting easier. And with cheaper digital devices, especially the smartphones getting cheaper, more and more young people from these countries are now getting online. But here is the important point. So far, we have only seen these young people as consumers. But now more and more of these people are not getting online just as consumers, but many of them are also content creators. So until the internet become a fairly accessible medium in countries of the global south, young people were, and from these countries especially, were identified as passive recipient of digital cultures and technologies from the global north. Now the young people from the countries of the global south are also actively producing content, generating new meanings, and contributing towards the global cultural practices and norms. They have a chance to infuse global communication flows with their own cultural sensitivities and also take charge of their own representations. So instead of, being represented as victims or subjects of global, especially Western development projects And as grey market consumers, these people really want to be presented as content creators and storytellers in their own right. Now, before we get into some more discussion on the digital participation of these young people, it would help to place this in a historical context, because there has been a long history of discussion on global information and communication system, and how imbalance and inequal these systems have been. So those who remember this history, the McBride Commission report, Many Voices, One World, published in 1980 by UNESCO, started an important debate on the world information and communication order and the global media flows. Later, these debates continued under the umbrella of the World Summit on the Information Society, WSIS, in Geneva in 2003 and in Tunis in 2005. The report drew attention to the inequalities across the world and imbalances in global communication and information flows, and especially between the countries of the global north and those in the global south, the rich countries and the comparatively poorer countries. Digital media, when they first became accessible to common people, they raised, and that time they were called new media. They raised much hope because they were seen as more democratizing. They were seen, it was seen that, there is not much gatekeeping in this media like the legacy media. Citizen journalism became a buzzword, and this media became synonymous with empowerment of the marginalized, where everyone had a chance to tell their story. So let's see if this hope has really materialized in the at least the last 2 decades. So we've recently, last year, my co-author Kiran Bhatia and I published a book called Gen Z Digital Media and Transcultural Lives at Home in the World. And then Kiran also wrote another book on Jugaad that young people, perform to be active on digital media. And both these books are based on ethnographic research in India. And in both these books, we claim that young people from the global south are actively using digital media to archive and document local systems of knowledge and cultural practices. And in doing so, they want to popularize the living heritage that they inhabit. So they have gained more confidence about telling, about their own lives, about proudly telling the global audiences about their own cultural heritage, their living heritage. In So this youth from such countries have started developing the confidence, and they have started shedding the victim identities. So far they have in the digital industries, they were represented more as cheap labor, but instead they want to be known as people proud of their heritage, cultural practices and values, and this is how they want to be represented. So we find youth from these countries actively representing themselves in gaming communities, like in all this like globally spread gaming communities, social media such as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, civic engagement communities, and also communities built around special interests like technology, fan fiction, or sports. And more young people are now participating in this very different kind of communities. We also recently conducted a study on Indian influencers who have found a global reach. And we wanted to know that, okay, what have they done, what strategies they use so that, they can tell their stories to not just national but global audiences. And we found that representing themselves and their cultures online involves a lot of individual negotiations for these people. They negotiate with the platform affordances in creating content, uh, and doing so, they foreground their cultural realities and aspirations while still remaining relevant to global audiences. So they have learned how to negotiate the platform affordances to make sure that they produce stories, for which they will find relevance in countries beyond their own. Also, this requires constantly being updated with technology, software, global trends, and platform metrics. And that's why it's not easy for every young person to be able to do this. Also, one of the other strategy that this influencer use to remain globally relevant is what we call culture brokering. Culture brokering is a negotiation strategy to foreground their local cultures, carve out a unique identity, and create spaces of collaboration. Through this strategy, they broker a space where different cultures, values, lifestyles, and identities can coexist. So, I mean, when I'm talking about these examples, you would say then it's time to celebrate, right? Uh, so I would say not quite. My response would be a mixed response of yes and no. So I would say that, I mean, the current scenario is hopeful, but it's far from perfect. And several issues that the McBride Commission report actually raised remain far from resolved, even now. So, for example, there is still unequal distribution of symbolic power, what Bourdieu called the power to construct reality between the countries of global north and the global south. Also, we have observed that the designers of digital technologies and spaces do not always prioritize ethical and democratic values and often perpetuate or even amplify existing biases and prejudices. So these remain like important issues. Also, the influencers from the global south that we studied, they have found in some success in reaching global audiences, that's a fact, but they have to constantly negotiate with the global north centric design norms and practices. They are compelled to package their persona and content in the forms that are unique and interesting enough to catch and sustain the attention of global audiences. Then again, the poorest parts of global south, they still lack full access to skills, devices, data, and information. Of course, many of the middle and upper income young people have got, substantial access to all these things. There are numerous young people, from still not so privileged backgrounds for home data and devices still remain out of reach. There are also other issues like surveillance from governments, corporations, families, and communities. And that is spreading, in fact. The more there is an uptake of new technologies, more the surveillance. And though men and women are equally susceptible to institutional and market surveillance, when it comes to family, we have observed that girls, like they are, especially women from poorer socioeconomic strata, they face the maximum assault on their privacy. And this happens in their homes and in their local environment. So the research also revealed that though there is a sense of power in being acknowledged as legitimate consumers and skilled professionals, and also experiencing and enjoying the agency of self representation, the balance of power ultimately skews in favor of multinationals and corporations. And the precarity and conflict in all aspects of life for Gen Z are on the rise. And this was again, one of the findings of our ethnographic study. So, within this limiting conditions, the young content creators from the global south still use the affordances of social media like user generated content, multimodality, archiving, networking, and documenting to create narratives about their heritage, about their aspirations, about their lived realities, and they influence the global communication flows. And in this way, they create ruptures in the long existing global north centered one way communication flows. But I would argue that they would need our support if we really want to promote media representation that reflects diversity, inclusivity, and equity. And I know these terms have become controversial recently, but I still do believe in them in their true essence. When they are practiced in their true essence, these are still very important terms. So, I mean, what can all of us do? From the academic point of view, I recommend the practice of multiliteracies to support young people in exerting a sensitive, ethical, and yet bold public voice. We really need to help our young people to develop a strong public voice. And to help them to claim the right to tell their own stories and shape their own representations. So, here I would like to broaden the concept of multiliteracy. This concept was originally developed by the New London Group in 1990s in response to the changes in how people communicate. Multiliteracy acknowledges the changes brought about by the new media technologies and the diversity in language that we use across different communities and cultures. So, we propose that young people would benefit by consciously including multiliteracies. And by multiliteracies here, I mean geopolitical literacy, historical literacy, critical media and information literacy, and eco-media literacy. And this could be done in formal as well as non-formal pedagogies. Let me quickly just walk you through some of these literacies. So, by historical literacy, I mean that young people both in global north and the global south need to be exposed to the histories of colonization, conflicts between different regions and communities, because it is these histories that are affecting their present lives and they might not know about it, and the marginalization that different communities have suffered. Also, cultural practices of South South interactions, because again, the young people today might mostly would not know about this. This requires investigating history with the intent of analyzing the links to the modified or new forms of discrimination that we see today in the world. So, young people need to know that what they are experiencing, positively or negatively, is very much linked to their histories of their countries, histories of their cultures and communities, and this should become part of the literacies, not in a way that make them feel angry or helpless, but in a way that can help them find solutions to conflict. The second I would say would be geopolitical literacy, because one thing we found in our conversations with young people in many cities of India, also some of the small towns, is that they often see global as Western, and they ignore the diversity that actually makes the world. So, our students should also understand that global means there are many other countries that are not part of the global north. They should also understand the current global power dynamics and the practices of neocolonialism. And they should be aware of the new debates surrounding global communication and information flows. The third is critical media and information literacy. So, media representation, online safety, digital literacy, such as practical skills in multimedia production and expression, multimedia storytelling, multimodal storytelling, and developing a strong public voice are all part of critical media and information literacy. So, my argument is that making multiliteracies a part of our education system will foster an ethical and democratic exchange across the world and reduce the danger of single stories. They will build more cross cultural empathy through witnessing and actually acknowledging multiple life stories. Because everybody's life story is important, and everyone should get a chance to tell their own story. So, I strongly believe that multiple and synergetic actions against are required from all different stakeholders. What happens in our neoliberal society is that we leave a lot of things to the individual and we say, well, it's your life, you take care of it. And young people are doing what they can, but they need support from everyone, their parents, their families, also government, public institutions, UN agencies, and not the list corporations and private sector, civil society, policymakers, as well as, us, the educators.
Yeah, the
Yes.
floor is now open for questions. Requesting the discipline team to assist the audience with mic for Q&A session. We'll take 2 questions at a time.
Ma'am, you talked about women from marginalized sections face assault even in their surroundings, in their mere surroundings. So, ma'am, and then you also talked about self representation and balance of power. So, ma'am, like we have seen, stories usually are not coming up when they are required to, and we read stories when the things are all over the place. So, what's your take on that? Because there is a lot of observation that goes around, but then it's not coming up due to fear of people not wanting to take up others' lives and not wanting to share it up. So, how can we make it more common among people to support lives of these marginalized sections, ma'am?
So, first of all, I believe that everyone has a right to decide whether they want their story to be told or not, right? So, if somebody doesn't want their story to be told, I think we should respect that desire. But if someone wants their story to be told and they are facing constraints, I think that is where we can really help. So, what we have done with young women is that we have directed them to safe communities, where they are not trolled or they don't become victims of sexual abuse. Because, see, digital spaces can do both. They can empower you with connecting you to like-minded people, but they can also break you because there are all kinds of people, so we direct them to communities that are safe, because that is where they can actually hone their skills and get more confidence in telling their stories, right? So, like non-judgmental communities, moderated communities of young women from all across the world. So, those are some of the spaces where we can direct these girls. That is one thing. Parental education is also very important, and that's why I said critical media literacy, because uh, we can't say that there are no risks involved in digital media participation. So we have to make these girls aware of the risks, not to spread panic, but we have to equip them with the right tools so that they can safely tell their stories, right? So those are some of the things I think we should be doing.
Thank you, ma'am. Just, ma'am, I would like to add on and wants to take your opinion in that. Ma'am, can we talk about empowerment of voice to these marginalized sections, and also societal sensitization? What's your take on that? Because if we take societal sensitization and also empowerment of voice to these sections who are actually facing harassment, so how would you define it, and what should be the right choice?
See, that's the thing, right? Why is a community disempowered or marginalized? Because those in power, whether it's gender or class or whatever, I mean, those in power don't want, these voices. They want to keep their own voices dominant. So social awareness is very important. Also, as far as digital media are concerned, what we see in media are mostly very sensational stories of harm. And again, I'm not saying that harm doesn't happen or there are no risks involved, but and that's why I'm such a strong advocate of media and information literacy, because we can't say that, look, there is this risk, so don't use it, right? It's like telling everyone that don't cross the roads because there is a risk of accident happening. We have to teach people right from their childhood how to cross the road. And this is what we need to do with both, I mean, all the three groups: parents, teachers, and children. That yes, there are risks, yes, there are harms, but you can also do wonderful things when you use digital media in the right way. And I think that's the sensitization we really need.
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks a lot for the lot of clarity you bring up in the discussion. Thank you, ma'am.
We actually have written a paper called Good Girls Don't Go Online. And this is based on our work with young girls, who got this very strong message from their families that if you are a good girl, you shouldn't be online. And we have to counter that.
Right, ma'am. Like you mentioned, it's very scary, ma'am, because we read stories where young girls are being chopped up by people, who are getting into relationships. Then again, stories are not being covered when they are going to police stations when they're already facing harassment. We have got such stories, ma'am.
So right stories need to come out, and as I said, like, digital media are very powerful in both ways. So unless we equip them for the right kind of use, then they cannot make, actually the right use of this media.
Right, ma'am. I believe we need people like you and a lot of others who take up these stories, ma'am.
Yeah, stories, and also I again would say, like, critical media and information literacy.
Right, ma'am. Right, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much.